Hey y'all, it's Kate from the Apothecary and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm back with another 100 of my favorite books read on Goodreads episode. This is episode 9, so we only have 2 more, maybe 3 more with honorable mentions left. So I'm just going to dive right into this group of 10 books that were my favorite reads on Goodreads. First up, we have Gulliver's Travels. This is by Jonathan Swift. It's a classic fantasy 18th century. It's first released in 1726, and a spoiler-free summary, if you don't know Gulliver's Travel, I feel like it's one of those books that people either absolutely know or people don't know at all. So, spoiler-free summary of Gulliver's Travels. This book describes the 4 voyages of Gulliver, a ship's surgeon. In Lilliput, he discovers a world of miniature where he can observe as a god. Brobdingnag, a land of giants, Gulliver is under observation. But in Laputa, this is a flying island, and it's a land of speculators and projectors while their country is in ruin. And in Hieronymus, this is a land of gentle horses. So different from each other. Why is this one on my list? Because the imagination that it took to write this book by Jonathan Swift was just beyond anything that I could ever imagine. The wit and delivery in this book for me was by far some of the best that I've ever read. I fell in love with this book instantly. And we have such direct social commentary in this fantasy world with all these fantasy creatures that it's some of the best social commentary in fantasy that you get, because you can see it, you can feel it, you can hear it, but it's with all of these different fantastical creatures, and so it doesn't feel as preachy as some of the other social commentaries in fantasy books do. Some quotes from Gulliver's Travel. They bury their dead with their heads directly downwards because they hold an opinion that in 11,000 moons they are all to rise again, in which period the earth, which they conceive to be flat, will turn upside down, and by this means they shall at their resurrection be found ready, standing on their feet. The learned among them confess the absurdity of this doctrine, but the practice still continues in compliance to the vulgar. And I feel like that just hits kind of our society on a nose right now. Just such a great way of describing Gulliver's Travels. Next up, we have There by Tommy Orange. This is a contemporary fiction and indigenous literature. This was released in 2018. This novel follows 12 characters from indigenous communities. They're all traveling to the big Oakland powwow, and they're all connected to one another in ways that they may not yet realized. Together, this chorus of voices tells of the plight of the urban Native American, grappling with a complex and painful history, with an inheritance of beauty and spirituality, with communion and sacrifice and heroism. Why is this one on my list? For me, this was a stunning weaving of different narratives. It was a remarkable debut novel. It has incredibly moving prose and a moving story. It's vivid, realistic characters. Some quotes from There. We are the memories we don't remember, which live in us, which we feel, which make us sing and dance and pray the way we do. Feelings from memories that flare and bloom unexpectedly in our lives like blood through a blanket. From a wound made by a bullet fired by a man shooting us in the back, for our hair, for our heads, for a bounty, or just to get rid of us. And they took everything and ground it down to dust, as fine as gunpowder. They fired their guns into the air in victory, and their strays flew out into the nothingness of histories written wrong and meant to be forgotten. Stray bullets and consequences are landing on our unsuspecting bodies even now. Next up, we have The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is a classic science fiction dystopian novel. This was first released in 2006, and that surprised me because I thought it was a lot older than that, but Goodreads says 2006, so that's what I'm going with. Spoiler-free summary of The Road. This is a profoundly moving story of a journey of a father and son who walk through America. Nothing moves. Everything is gray and dark, except for our two characters. They are each other's world and sustained by love. Why is this one on my list? McCarthy's simplistic prose tells a profoundly complex story. And this book, I feel like, is so instrumental in dystopian fiction, and while I was reading this, it felt like it was an instant classic, and it was instantly popular among many, many people when it came out. Some quotes from The Road. You forget what you want to remember, and you remember what you forget. Keep a little fire burning, however small, however hidden. If trouble comes when you least expect it, then maybe the thing to do is to always expect it. And by day, the banished sun circles the earth like a grieving mother with a lamp. Next up, we have Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a steampunk fantasy, historical fiction, maybe a little sci-fi in there too. This was released in 2015. This is a fantasy, steampunk, sci-fi war novel. Denland's revolutionaries assassinate their king, launching a war after generations of peace. Then they fought Laskin. Waves of young men are recruited to fight. And then when another call goes out for volunteers, genteel Emily Marshwick's family has nothing but women and their elderly servants left. Emily answers and goes to war. Why is this one on my list? I read this one a year ago and I still think about it all the time. Its storytelling is by far some of the best storytelling I have ever read. Its characters are real, gritty, grim. I love them so much, and this is one of the best female protagonists in a war novel, in a science fiction, fantasy novel, and written by a male. I was drawn in from page 1 of reading this. I knew I was going to love this book after reading page 1. And this book kind of feels like it's World War I fiction, Vietnam War fiction with Jane Austen thrown in the mix. Some quotes from Guns of Dawn. The first casualty of war is truth. And so you see, perhaps the coward is the bravest of all men. When he goes to war, he must conquer himself even before he goes to meet his enemy. And I just love those two quotes. Next up, we have another classic. That's To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is one of my all-time favorite classics. And even though this list is not in any kind of numerical order, I'm surprised this hasn't come up earlier. This is a classic historical fiction and YA. This was first released in 1960 and it was instantly a classic. This is the unforgettable novel of a childhood in a sleepy southern town and the crisis of conscience that rocked it. It takes readers to the roots of human behavior, to innocence and experience, kindness and cruelty, love and hatred, humor and pathos. Why is this one on my list? From my very first read of To Kill a Mockingbird, it opened my eyes to things that my small town upbringing hid from me. Its deeply compassionate characters move me every single time. And Atticus Finch is the model father in all of literature. He is like the best dad in all of literature. Some quotes from To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it. I wanted you to see what real courage is. Instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand, it's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what. And we're paying the highest tribute you can pay a man. We trust him to do right. It's that simple. Next up, we have The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. This is a classic in its own sense, historical fiction and Asian literature. This was first released in 1989. 4 mothers, 4 daughters, 4 families, whose histories shift with the 4 winds depending on who's telling the stories. In 1949, 4 Chinese women, recent immigrants to San Francisco, meet weekly to play mahjong and tell stories of what they left behind in China. United in loss and new hope for their daughters' futures, they call themselves the Joy Luck Club. Their daughters, who have never heard these stories, think their mother's advice is irrelevant to their modern American lives until their own inner crises reveal how much they've unknowingly inherited their mother's past. Why is this one on my list? I loved the storytelling in the Joy Luck Club. It felt like I was sitting around the table listening to these mothers tell their stories. Our characters are relatable. Even though I have very little in common with these characters, I felt like I could still relate to them. It's sensitive and witty in the relationships, especially those mother-daughter relationships, and the relationships of all the mothers and all the daughters was just so endearing to me. Some quotes from this book. Then you must teach my daughter this same lesson. How to lose your innocence, but not your hope. How to laugh forever. And I just love that one. For unlike my mother, I did not believe I could be anything I wanted to be. I could only be me. And that just puts such a different perspective on ambition. Next up, we only have a couple more left. Our next book up is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This is a classic feminism, LGBTQ, queer, historical fiction book. First released in 1982. The Color Purple depicts the lives of African American women in the early 20th century rural Georgia. Separated as girls, sisters Celie and Nettie sustain their loyalty to and hope in each other across time, distance, and silence. Through a series of letters spanning 20 years, first from Celie to God, then the sisters to each other, despite the unknown, the novel draws readers into its rich and memorable portrayals of Celie, Nettie, Shook Avery, and Sophia and their experience. Why is this one on my list? This brings to light domestic and sexual abuse for the first time in this kind of genre and these kinds of books. Our characters are raw and are real. This is deeply, deeply emotional. It felt like it was life-changing as I was reading it, and it made me see the color purple everywhere. And if you've read this book, you know what that means. If you haven't read this book, go and read it, and then you'll understand what that means. And I still think about this book all the time. Some quotes from The Color Purple. I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it. We will never have to be other than who we are in order to be successful. We realize that we are, as ourselves, unlimited and our experiences valid. It is for the rest of the world to recognize this if they choose. And then T to the English is really a picnic indoors. And that quote makes me laugh every single time. Next up, and we have, I think, just 3 books left on this list. The Devil in the White City Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. This is by Eric Larson. This is nonfiction, true crime, and mystery. First released in 2003. This takes place in 1893, Chicago's World's Fair. We have two different points of view, two perspectives. Daniel H. Burnham, the architect responsible for the fair's construction, and H. Holmes, who is a serial killer masquerading as a doctor. Combining the stories of an architect and a killer in one book, mostly in alternating chapters, works so well for Larson. Why is this one on my list? It has very excellent writing, great research woven into writing seamlessly. It doesn't feel like this part is research, this part is story. It all blends in together and you can't tell which part is true and which part is fiction. Although it read like fiction, I had to look up so many times whether this was fiction or nonfiction because it read like a really great mystery novel. And it kind of completely transfixed me. I got lost in time reading this book. Time just slipped away from me, and before I knew it, it was several hours into reading this one book, which is rare for me in reading. Some quotes from this book. It was so easy to disappear, so easy to deny knowledge, so very easy in the smoke and din to mask that something dark had taken root. This was Chicago on the eve of the greatest fair in history. Besides his own person and his own interests, nothing is sacred to the psychopath. Beneath the stars, the lake lay dark and somber, Stead wrote, but on its shores gleamed and glowed in golden radiance the ivory city, beautiful as a poet's dream, silent as a city of the dead. And I just love the atmosphere that that quote paints here. And only Poe could have dreamed the rest. Next up, we have Grant by Ron Chernow. This is a biography of General Grant, President Grant. This was first released in 2017. Ulysses S. Grant's life is often summarized in stereotypes. However, these don't come close to capturing Grant's spirit and the magnitude of his accomplishments. In this biography, Chernow has produced a portrait of Grant that is a masterpiece, the first to provide a complete understanding of the general and president whose fortunes rose and fell with dizzying speed and frequency. The definitive sense of all sides of Grant's life, explaining how this Midwesterner could at once be so ordinary and so extraordinary. Why is this one on my list? The writing in this book is absolutely stellar. Our subject matter is gripping. I felt like I personally knew all the characters here because of the little tiny details that Ron Chernow includes. And it was as if I was watching life happen, especially at the end in these last couple chapters. It felt like I was watching this. And Chernow made Grant into a whole person. Not just the president, not just the general, but a whole person. We saw Grant from all sides, good and bad, and that's one of the things I appreciate most in biography. Some quotes from Grant. Nothing alarmed the white South more than black power at the polls, which was why most terror was directed there, which sadly is still true today. I am a verb instead of a personal pronoun. A verb is anything that signifies to be, to do, or to suffer. I signify all three. The free school is the promoter of that intelligence which is to preserve us as a free nation. If we were to have another contest in the near future of our national existence, I predict that the dividing line will not be Mason and Dixon's, but between patriotism and intelligence on the one side, and superstition, ambition, and ignorance on the other. And again, too true still to this day. Summing up Grant's career, Frederick Douglass wrote, "In him, the Negro found a protector, the Indian a friend, a vanquished foe, a brother, an imperiled nation a savior." And that kind of sums up Grant, especially in this biography, and all that he had to do with so well. Now, the last book on this list is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is a nonfiction memoir, first released in 2015. It's a letter to his adolescent, I think like 15-year-old son. Coates shares his story of his awakening to the truth about his place in the world through a series of revelatory experiences. From Howard University to Civil War battlefields, from the south side of Chicago to Paris, from his childhood home to the living rooms of mothers whose children's lives were taken as American plunder. Personal narrative, reimagined history, and fresh, emotionally charged reporting clearly illuminates the past, bracingly confronts our present, and offers a transcendent vision for a way forward. Why is this one on my list? Because this prose was deeply emotional and personal. Its weaving narratives were done so well, and it provides a different perspective on kind of the same topic that we get a lot. Some quotes from this book: "You are growing into consciousness, and my wish for you is that you feel no need to construct yourself to make other people comfortable." And I was made for the library, not the classroom. The classroom was a jail of other people's interests. The library was open, unending, free. That is my list of 10 books for our episode 9 of my favorite 100 books read on Goodreads. We'll have just 2 more episodes left. One to round out the favorite 100, and another one with some honorable mentions that didn't make the cut here but still need to be talked about. If you've read any of these books, let me know in the comments below. What did you think of them? Which ones of these would make your list of favorite 100 books read? Which ones are you adding to your TBR to read in 2025? As always, keep reading, and I love you all to the moon and back. Bye.